Okay, so for this video lecture, we will have our module number 4 entitled Client Acceptance. So before we proceed with the discussion proper, let us have a short overview about the contents of this module. So this will include the discussions about the pre-engagement procedures being done before the auditor will accept the audit engagement. So there is also a need to discuss the audit-related issues and matters between the predecessor and successor auditor, and the audit engagement letter that is to be followed through the course of the audit engagement. For the learning outcomes, so at the end of this module, you will be able to first familiarize and demonstrate understanding of the pre-engagement procedures before accepting of the audit engagement. Second is understand the necessary correspondence done between the predecessor and successor auditor before the auditor will accept the engagement. And third is to be familiarized and understand the contents and purpose of having an audit engagement letter in the conduct of an audit engagement. So for the indicative content, so we have the pre-engagement procedures, predecessor auditor and successor auditor, and the audit engagement letter. Okay, so for this video lecture, we will be discussing about the pre-engagement procedures. Okay, so to start with the discussion, so the term pre-engagement procedures, this is referred to the performance that assist the auditor in deciding whether he will accept or reject the audit engagement. So in making the decisions either to accept or reject the engagement, the auditor should also consider the following factors. The first is his competence. Okay, if he is able to handle the audit engagement, if he has been in or if he has the experience of auditing, okay, the same nature, and have acquired knowledge about the audit process for that particular entity and nature of their business. Another factor to consider is his independence, meaning if he is able to perform, okay, the necessary steps or procedures in which his independence will not be impaired, especially that he should consider if there are any indirect or direct influence that might exist between the auditor and the entity. So an example of an influence is when the wife, for example, of the auditor is the board of the director of the entity to be audited. So in this case, there is a somewhat influence that exists because of the relationship. Okay, and in that case, the auditor might consider not accepting the engagement because his independence might be impaired. So meaning there is a chance that his expression of opinion or conclusion will be biased. Okay. Another thing that the auditor should also consider is his ability to serve his client properly. So it will follow if he is competent and has professional judgment and is to follow the guidelines set forth, okay, in the conduct of the audit. Okay, aside from the factors that is in the auditor, the auditor should also consider, okay, the things or the factors that is in the client or the potential client that he will serve. So here, the auditor should also consider the integrity of his prospective client's management if they are not related to any unlawful practices or entities for him to be able to accept the audit engagement. Okay, so those are the very important things and factors that the auditor should consider. But aside from that, there are other things as we go along. So again, these are usually done during the pre-engagement procedures. This is before the auditor will accept or reject the audit engagement. So these are done, okay, to convince the auditor if the audit engagement is acceptable or not. Okay, so during the pre-engagement procedures, so the auditor should also perform the following activities. Okay, the first is he will perform procedures related to the continuance of the client relationship and the specific audit engagement. So here, this is in the case where, for example, if the auditor have been the auditor of the client for the past year and he will still continue to audit this current year. Okay, so he will determine if the relationship that exists between them due to the audit engagement can impair his independence or the like. Okay, so that will also be a basis to be used if he will still continue to accept the audit engagement procedures with that of the entity or the client entity. Okay, so here another is he should also determine compliance with independence and ethic requirements. So that is what we have mentioned earlier regarding the indirect or direct influences that may exist between the auditor and the client entity. So these are the most cases where, or the instances where the auditor's opinion might be influenced and can become biased later on because of the influence that may exist. So he should determine that. Okay, so note that the determination of compliance with independence and the ethical requirements is not limited only during the preliminary activities. This should be reevaluated during the course of the audit because in those instances there might be changes, okay, that will occur. So from time to time, the auditor should consider if he is still independent or not. So the question here is, who can determine if the auditor is independent? Okay, the answer is the auditor himself, because he knows if he is able to be influenced or not. And he knows that if there any influence that may exist that can create bias on his, especially on his expression of opinion or conclusion. Okay, so another activity during the pre-engagement procedures are, of course, very important thing is to establish the understanding of the terms of the audit engagement with the audit committee. Okay, the audit committee is on the part of the management, okay, under audit, because most likely there will be or during the conduct of the audit, there are a lot of discussions that will take place between the auditor and the audit committee in terms of the audit engagement. Okay, and the auditor should also make sure that all of these engagement terms are in accordance with the Philippine standards on auditing. Okay, another is, so before the audit will begin, so the procedure performs pre-engagement, okay, as mentioned, to either accept or continue the procedure. So these are the following. So aside from what we have mentioned, these are also some of the other things that he should consider. Okay, number one is independence assessment. Okay, so we've mentioned that also. Second is the pre-engagement assessment. So here, this will include the understanding of the auditor about the management terms and conditions about the audit engagement and the like. And then, of course, he should communicate with the previous auditor if that is applicable in the case where he is now the new auditor, meaning the previous year the financial statement last year or in the previous year was audited by the different auditor. So before accepting or rejecting the audit engagement, it is very important that the new auditor will communicate with the past auditor. So we will discuss these communications in the next part of this module. Okay, so throughout the process, so we can expect that there is a letter that communicates the auditor's independence and compliance with relevant professional standards. So in this case, there should be a statement coming from the auditor that he is indeed independent and is able to comply with the relevant professional standards in the conduct of the audit, because in this case, if there is any impairment of the auditor's independence, so he will be responsible for it. Okay, so that's how strong the statement is, and this is how great the responsibility of the auditor is. Okay, that's why there should be a letter of statement about the auditor's independence and compliance with those standards. Another is disclosure of all the relationships between the auditor and the entity and its related entities that may affect the auditor's independence. So this is very important because this will determine if indeed the auditor is independent, okay, or if there are any immaterial and indirect influence that might exist. These are not subject to influence, okay, or this cannot influence the auditor. Okay, so this is the reason why there should be a disclosure about the relationship that may exist. Okay, another is once the pre-engagement assessment is complete. So here, for example, all of the prerequisites were met by the auditor and the prospective client, and that the auditor now decides that he will accept the audit engagement. So the auditor will now issue the audit engagement letter. So this will include the following. So the engagement of objectives, the scope and limitations. It will state also the management's responsibility as well as responsibility for any adjustments that may be required of them, as well as the auditor's responsibility and other matters, and most especially the audit fees, okay, that will be charged by the auditor for a specific audit engagement. Okay, but in the last part of this module, we will discuss the audit engagement letter. Okay, so in order to establish whether the preconditions for the audit are present, so here, aside from those mentioned earlier, the auditor should also determine if the financial reporting framework that will be applied in the, or that is applied, I mean, in the preparation of the financial statements of the client is acceptable, or else it can be that the criteria is not suitable. So that's very important, okay, before accepting the engagement, to determine already if the criteria to be used is suitable. Okay, another is to obtain the agreement of management that it acknowledge and understand their responsibility. So this is also one of the important considerations, because if the management will not understand or agree with their responsibility, so the auditor might expect that during the conduct of the audit, there will be conflicts that may exist between him and the management, because in the first place, they do not know what their responsibilities are. So this is very important that in the beginning or before or even before the audit engagement started, the management should understand it and it is clear to them what are their responsibilities are. So here are their responsibilities. Number one, they are responsible for the preparation of the financial statements, and it should be in accordance with the applicable financial reporting framework. Okay, so that is their responsibility. Another is, it is also their responsibility for establishing internal controls that is necessary so that in the course of preparing their financial statements, this will be free from material misstatement, whether that will be due from fraud or error. Meaning to say, in the first place, the management has already the responsibility that they should prevent any misstatement, okay, during the preparation of their own financial statements. And it is not or they should not wait for the auditor to determine that they have indeed misstatements in the preparation of their financial statements. Okay, so again, this is also one of the very important responsibilities of the management. Okay, another is, they are also responsible for providing the auditor with access to all information in which they or the management is aware that are relevant to the preparation of their FS, such as the records, documentation, and other related matters. So this is because the auditor will be gathering audit evidence from these documents. So therefore, it is a must that the management should give access to all information, okay, which are relevant for the auditor to obtain appropriate and sufficient audit evidence. Okay, another responsibility of the management is to provide the auditor also with additional information that he may request from the management. Okay, so aside from those documents related to financial statements, the auditor might also, during the course of the audit, will request some non-financial data, but with a relationship or influence over the preparation of the financial statements. So this should be available also to be given to the auditor by the management. Okay, so another responsibility of the management is to provide the auditor with unrestricted access to the persons within the entity from which the auditor determines it is necessary to obtain audit evidence. So meaning to say, aside from the documents, the records, the auditor will also gather evidence from the people within the entity. So this is through observation, interviews, queries, and so on. So in this case, the management should give access to the auditor to obtain audit evidence from the employees or the management or whosoever the auditor will request information from. Okay, so those are the different responsibilities of the management that should be considered by the auditor during the pre-engagement procedures.